Just see it going live. Hello. Brilliant. Hiya. So I'm here. This is on Mary Turner Thompson, author of The Bigamist and the Psychopath, just having a lovely conversation about psychopathy with two of the founders of the psychopathyis.org website, which I think is absolutely fabulous. I'm going to do a little intro, which I'm going to have to read it because I'm never good at remembering these things. But psychopathy is a prevalent and serious mental disorder that affects 1 in 100 children and adults. Because of common myths and stigmas, almost no public or private resources are available to help affected individuals and families. And this is one of the reasons why these founding members have created this website called psychopathyis.org. Abigail Marsh is with us. She's a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Georgetown University. She conducts neuroscience research on neural, social, and emotional correlates of empathy and compassion and dysfunctions that emerge in the processes in children and adults with psychopathy. That's a mouthful. She describes her research in her award-winning book, The Fear Factor, which I bought and I'm about to read. It's on my list. How One Emotion Connects Altruists, Psychopaths, and Everyone in Between, in her 2016 TED Talk, which I've also watched and I do thoroughly recommend you watch as well. Lisa Michael, is it Michael or Michelle? Michael. Lisa Michael is a physics teacher at Summit Denali High School in Sunnyvale, California, and has taught advanced placement physics for over 30 years in several San Francisco Bay Area high schools. She's also been an investor in and property manager of single-family homes in multiple West Coast college towns for the last 21 years. She's been inspired to become involved with the psychopathy community due to the extensive mental health problems experienced by many members of her family across multiple generations. So welcome, both of you. I feel in awe of having you both on having a chat with me. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So what spurred you on to create the website? Abby, why don't you start? Let us know what you think. How did you come about?
Absolutely. I mean, the most proximal inspiration for me was Lisa, actually. I had worked with children who have psychopathic traits and their families for many years, doing basic research. I am not a clinician, so I don't do any treatment myself, but I'm trying to understand the origin of their disorders. And the thing that stood out to me in working with these children and their families was how very few resources they had to help them, how they struggled to find anybody who could provide appropriate treatment for their child. They struggled to find anybody who even knew what an appropriate treatment was. And the children oftentimes, tragically, would just continue to get worse and worse until they ended up in institutions or committing, terrible crimes in some cases. And I always thought to myself that if I ever had an opportunity to do anything concrete to help families like these, I would. And the opportunity only arose when Lisa contacted me. She read an article in the Atlantic Monthly in which I've been quoted about my research. And she gave me a call and said, you know what, I'm also motivated to do something about this problem. And how can we make this happen? And due to her incredible energy and passion, we put the website together.
Fantastic. So Lisa, what prompted you to actually contact Abby? What was the kind of catalyst?
Yeah, there was sort of a moment like that about 2 years ago where just thinking about the mental health issues of many members of my close family, where I just said, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something now. I'm going to try to do something. Yeah. I did contact Abby, and it was pretty interesting because I sent her an email and then I decided last month to put my phone number in under my name. And then as I was walking away from my desk, she called me. I was not too many feet away from my desk. Yeah. And that's how it started.
Oh, that's amazing. So, I mean, so Abby, how would you describe psychopathy in layman terms?
Yeah, this is an important question because, of course, there's the layman sort of understanding of psychopathy, which isn't actually that well aligned with what it really is from a clinical point of view. So the first thing I usually do in trying to explain what psychopathy is clarifying what it isn't. So it isn't the same thing as persistent violence. There are lots of reasons that people can engage in violence, and psychopathy is only one of them. And a huge proportion of people who have psychopathy are not violent. So it has nothing to do with sort of adult male criminals necessarily. That's again the real stereotype of people who are psychopathic, is that they're always criminals. It's only adult men. These things are not true. Psychopathy is a constellation of personality traits, at the core of which or what are called in the US now, it's a little bit of an unwieldy term, but it does capture the issue, limited prosocial emotions. So a lack of care and compassion for other people's welfare, a lack of remorse, a lack of guilt after you've done something wrong. And that core personality traits, when it's combined with difficulty inhibiting behavior and a sort of a fearless, bold temperament, can result in the whole suite of antisocial behaviors that we do see increase in people with psychopathy. It can include violence and aggression, but sometimes the behaviors you see the most of are sort of making threats and bullying, conning and manipulating people, pathological lying, stealing, just any kind of behavior that suggests that you don't think the welfare of other people has any intrinsic value.
Yeah.
You care about yourself, you don't care about other people.
Yeah, absolutely. God, that sounds so familiar.
Here's the thing. I mean, the top of our website is everybody knows someone with psychopathy, because the thing is, when you understand the reality of what psychopathy is, everybody says, oh, I know somebody like that. Everybody. And so I think that's really important to make it clear that this is not a problem that affects a tiny fraction of the population. It affects everybody. Everybody has been affected by somebody with psychopathy.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that's what I get from my feedback from my book more than anything else, is people saying, actually, thank you, because now things make sense. Yeah. You know, sort of like, I think a lot of people know someone with psychopathy, but don't necessarily know why that's happening and why what's the sort of motivation behind what they're doing. So I think it's fascinating, I have to say. So so Lisa, what do you think are the biggest misunderstandings about psychopathy in society? What do you think,
for me, it would be, I think, people's impression that they could tell by talking to someone for 20 minutes or a half hour, or even more extreme, like if they were their neighbor or a colleague they didn't know very well, that they would just know, they would sense that they were psychopathic, and that is, to me, a pretty bad misunderstanding.
Yeah. No, I recognize that. I mean, there's a lot of people that sort of feedback saying, oh, you should have known, if you were dating somebody, or how did you not know? I think is the one I get the most, is how could you possibly not have known? One of the things actually somebody said a wee while ago, well, I can't claim credit for it, but was that actually, it's not the red flags when you're dating a psychopath is not that they are aggressive or rude, it's the love bombing. It's that they're over they're over romantic. They're, you feel like the relationship is being dragged on a little quicker than you would want. It's that that's the red flag, is the love bombing, as opposed to, so it's being too nice as opposed to being aggressive or nasty.
I highly recommend, for people who are interested, watching some of the video interviews that we've done on our website with M.E. Thomas, who has written a wonderful book about her own experiences having psychopathy and who is on our advisory board. And she describes that before she underwent treatment for her psychopathy, which has been really effective, that she didn't know how to have a relationship with people without manipulating them. That was the only way she ever interacted with people, was behaving in ways toward them that would get her what she wanted further down the road. And a lot of the time that does take the form of being really nice, right? She would describe herself as often being the best friend in the world. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? I don't care, whatever you want. Because every time you do something nice for a person, if you have a psychopathic personality, it's like a little chit that you're adding up in your column that you can then draw down the road. And so, it's one of the reasons that this terrific early book about psychopathy called The Mask of Sanity by Herbie Cleckley, who was one of the first people to really define the condition, is such a good title, because people who are psychopathic, that's the most extraordinary thing about them sometimes, is that they seem so nice and normal, like just like the nicest, most interesting person on the surface. And you can't tell sometimes what kind of personality traits are hiding behind that surface.
Yeah, my ex used to come across as the most humble, very accomplished, but very humble about it. So I do recognize that entirely. So what would you advise people to look out for, Abby? Sort of with regard to psychopathy?
Yeah, so the signs are different depending on the age range. When you're looking at really young kids, and that we do have good evidence that the earliest signs of psychopathy can emerge as early as 2 or 3. Many parents of kids who later developed psychopathy said that they knew something was not quite right, even when their kid was a toddler. And the things to look out for in young kids tend to either be a very fearless temperament, so being not appropriately fearless. Yeah. So fearlessness is at the core of psychopathy. By itself, it doesn't lead to antisociality, but it seems to be the beginning of a cascade of problems that leads to antisociality over the course of development. But very young kids with psychopathy tend to they're just not afraid of anything. And one of the reasons this is a problem, it's a problem for 2 reasons. The first is that if you don't have an appropriate fear response, you don't respond at all to punishment. Because that's the way that punishment, and I don't mean, violent physical punishment, I mean any kind of negative correction. The way that they work is that you're afraid of it happening again, and so you don't do the thing that elicited the punishment, even if it's just a timeout. And so just some low-level fear responding is necessary to respond to punishment. And so this is a really common experience of parents of kids with psychopathy, is that it doesn't matter what punishment you apply, they're not afraid of it. And then the other thing is sort of an emotional coldness when it comes to other people, not seeming too interested in other people as people, maybe being resistant of affection, that sort of a thing. And then as kids get older, they start showing more overt manipulation and lying and aggression and other kinds of antisocial behavior. And then when you go to adolescence and adulthood, you start seeing even more of that behavior and manipulative sort of conning type behaviors related to trying to charm people into doing the things you want. A lot of really disinhibited behaviors, so doing things without thinking, even more than the average adolescent or young adult.
It's hard to tell. Some teenagers are just like that anyway.
It's so funny. One of the criteria for assessing psychopathy in teens is a parasitic orientation, sort of leeching off other people. And, many parents comment like, all teens have a parasitic orientation. They all, rely on their parents for all the things they need, which is a little bit true. And it's really seeing a pattern of these kinds of behaviors across settings and over time. That's the key.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So, Lisa, what can you share of your story that kind of fits in with all of this? I don't want to be too personal, but
so one part of my story is before I contacted Abby, I actually spent a concentrated 9 or 10 months, and I'm very persistent and thorough, scouring like the whole United States, literally, on the internet over and over again, different phone calls, different websites, trying to find any sort of group or any sort of an organization at all for family members of people with psychopathic traits. I mean, over and over, different organizations. I found nothing after 9 to 10 months of seriously, persistently, repeatedly, I'm trying. So that's when I said, well, I guess going to have to start something. But I was really impressed by the lack of it. I even went so far as trying every mental health organization that I knew about. And then I would always ask for people for other suggestions. I even tried groups of family members of people in jail. I tried family members of people who had committed murders, family members of pedophiles. I mean, I really went around and tried a lot of different things. So, but my story is that many members of my family in at least 3 generations are significantly impacted by serious mental health issues. Most of them are of the type that cause them to treat other people poorly, very poorly, or totally ignore them. So it's a type of mental health issue that's really creates a lot of problems for the people around them. And I didn't really understand it to be mental health issues until I became an adult. I thought that's just how they were, and they were just difficult. I didn't realize there was a diagnosis to go along with the issue because there wasn't drug abuse, right? There weren't those sort of those sorts of things.
Sort of the classic things people think are wrong. You know, the classic things
Right.
people go, you know, oh, well, they're off the rails because they're doing this. Yeah.
Right. There wasn't drug abuse and there wasn't physical violence. So it took me a long time to get sorted out what was going on.
Yeah.
Right. And I will say one of the difficulties of running an organization focused on people with psychopathy and their families is that both because of the stigma and because of some of the risks involved, it is difficult for people to be public about their experiences. It's very different than having a child who has ADHD or who has autism or something like that. For so many reasons, one of which is, even though once upon a time, mental health professionals and society at large blamed parents, moms especially, for their kids' autism, used to also be the same for schizophrenia. There was actually a thing called a schizophrenic mother. The mom whose terrible mothering made her kid schizophrenic. And then even after we realized that wasn't a thing, it was the refrigerator mother, the mom whose terrible mothering made her kid autistic, right? This incredible shame and blame got heaped upon mothers for these disorders that we now know have a really strong genetic and in other ways biological basis and are not caused in any simple way by the way a parent raises their child within the normal, frame. I mean, if you lock your child in a room and don't talk to them, that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, normal parenting behaviors. Within the normal range. But we're still not there for psychopathy, right? People still blame family members a lot when somebody develops psychopathy. They assume that they must have done something to cause it. And a lot of the parents that I worked with feel that guilt and shame themselves. They believe that they did it somehow. Yeah,
it's maybe something they could have done or something, sort of like,
And so it's one of the real hurdles and one of the real, but also motivators for developing an organization like this is to make it clear to family members of people with psychopathy that this isn't something you caused. Again, if assuming all parenting is within the normal range, that's not how psychopathy emerges. It's a mental health disorder, just like autism, just like schizophrenia, and it deserves to be treated the same way and not to result in a lot of blame and shame for our parents.
Yeah. I think what you're doing is absolutely fantastic, and I think it's desperately needed. And I agree with you, Lisa. It's like I've looked for things, and there just hasn't been. I actually used to look for when my children's father was put in jail. I looked for books about for children about a psychopathic parent. And I looked, sort of how do you, because my go-to is books. My go-to is like somebody's written a book about it. They had to. There's millions of books out there, and there's no books. I mean, there was 2 books I found. One of which was Daddy's in jail, but it's okay. You can go visit him. And the other one was Mummy's in jail, which was a slightly older book, which is no, but she still loves you. And there was nothing that actually explains psychopathy to a child. There's nothing. And I do understand there's barriers to doing that, but it also means that every child of somebody, if you have a psychopathic father, there's nothing to show those children they're not completely isolated and they're not completely alone. So books for children about psychopathy I think would be a great thing to do.
I think the average person would really benefit from understanding what a real psychopathic person presents as and how to identify them, because how much misery could the average person be saved if they knew what to look out for them.
Yes.
I wanted to add in that I've actually had it said to me that, well, you just don't get along with such and so person in your family. You just don't have a good relationship with them. And that was sort of the explanation for why they were exhibiting these behaviors with me.
That's not really that's actually just that's kind of willfully ignoring the facts, isn't it? Kind of thing. So, but I think, that there are people I think education is the key. Absolutely think education is the key, but teaching people how to deal with this. I certainly wouldn't have been caught if I knew more about psychopaths at the time. I wouldn't have been in that situation. So I do think, that's one of the things I'm trying to do is educate people, and it's one of the reasons I'm in awe of what you're doing, because I think it's absolutely brilliant. So, but
the mental health community. Oh, go ahead.
No, go on. What were you
I was going to say the mental health community really has to do better.
Yeah.
I mean, as Lisa was saying, she looked on the websites of these major mental health organizations in the U.S. and elsewhere, and they don't even mention even the official, clinical disorders that are associated with psychopathy.
Yeah.
For example, in children in the U.S., a diagnosis of conduct disorder with limited prosocial emotions is essentially equivalent to saying the child has psychopathic traits, is at high risk for developing psychopathy as an adult. And major mental health organizations don't even mention that classification on their website, even though something like 1% of children will qualify for it. And it's one of the most common reasons that children are referred to mental health care is because of serious conduct problems. And it's just, I feel like there's this collective desire to wish it away. Nobody likes the fact that this is a common disorder. And that it is hard to treat. It's not untreatable. That's a myth. But it's hard, partly because we haven't invested enough resources in developing treatments. But we can't wish it away, like horrible things happen when we try to pretend that.
Yeah, I was going to say, certainly treating children has probably far more success, I would have thought, than treating adults, because as Judge Judy used to say, they're cooked. Like that lovely expression that you're not cooked yet, but yeah, once you're 18 you're kind of cooked, you're kind of set in your ways, whereas if you can actually identify and a treatment for children who are exhibiting, displaying psychopathic behavior, then you could at least teach them a way to manage that. There's an author in the UK who's actually, there's a film just been made of his book with the lovely Sam Heughan, and he identifies as a psychopath. He's been clinically diagnosed as a psychopath, and his wife is now being credited on the credits for because she has, because his character is a psychopath. The wife is the consultant saying how anyone would deal with this, which I think is that, and the fact that people are talking about that now, and he's not a danger to society. He's a fully functioning, productive member of society, and he's written books, and he's doing really well. He doesn't let anyone see his face, and he writes under a pseudonym. But it's actually it's nice to see things like that happening, because a diagnosis of psychopathy should not be damning. It should be a process for treatment, just the same way as a diagnosis of schizophrenia or anything else wouldn't be doing. One question, though, which is not on my original list, I hope you don't mind, but you describe it as a mental illness, whereas I've always understood that it's not a mental illness, that it's a disorder, that it's a personality disorder. So tell me that your take on that.
That's a great question. The reason that's officially not classified as a mental illness in the U.S. is because it's not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that's used to diagnose mental illnesses in the United States. That has nothing to do with its clinical reality or the science behind it. It's really more of trying to put it diplomatically, it's a decision that is not relevant to the science, right? It is clearly a developmental form of psychopathology, every bit as much as, for example, autism is. It has a strong genetic basis. We know exactly what kinds of neural dysfunctions are associated with it, which lead to cognitive dysfunctions, which lead to behavioral dysfunctions, which disrupt your ability to function in life. It has every single criterion that any kind of psychopathology should have. It's just, they tried to put it in the DSM, but it's very controversial for a lot of reasons.
It's in the DSM as antisocial personality disorder, isn't it?
That's the closest thing. Well, the closest thing is actually conduct disorder with limited prosocial emotions for a child. Those criteria look a lot like what's on psychopathy screening instruments. For adults, the most comparable thing is antisocial personality disorder, but unfortunately, the wisdom of the people who put the book together took out all the traits that really that distinguish people with psychopathy from other antisocial people. The callousness, the lack of remorse, those things are the signature of psychopathy, whereas antisocial personality disorder has much more focuses on specific behaviors that a person might engage in who has a long criminal history. And so a huge proportion of people with psychopathy don't qualify for ASPD, and a lot of people who have ASPD don't qualify for psychopathy. It became a really sort of grab bag of do you do antisocial things a lot, which is not, that just isn't a very effective way to hone in on specific causes and mechanisms that will respond to specific treatments. So it's not a very it was an attempt to put psychopathy in the DSM. It wasn't a very successful one.
Just needs to be better defined, doesn't it? So,
It needs to map onto the science.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it just doesn't.
And that again comes back to your wanting to do more research on it.
Yeah.
So you do actually on your website, you do request donations for to going towards research. So how is that going to be, you know, sort of like where do the donations go? So when people donate to you, what does that donate to? That make any sense?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so we are a nonprofit organization, so we can guarantee that what it will go for is toward research. It to some degree depends on how successful we are in getting donations, because it takes a lot of money to do research, mainly because you have to pay research personnel. But also the kind of research I do, like brain imaging research, is expensive on the face of it. So if we are very successful in getting donations, we will directly pay for research. The same kind of funding that major funding organizations supply to researchers to actually conduct the basic research that help us understand the disorder better. If the donations are smaller, they'll do things like pay for awards to travel to conferences for things like research trainees, or they might fund symposiums or things like that. It will all be research related.
Yeah. Brilliant. Good to know. It's like it was always just nice to know when somebody donates something where it's going to go and how it's going to go. So you how did you start? I mean, it's one of the questions I want to know. I listened to your TED talk, Abby, and utterly brilliant. As all TED talks are, I like listening to them, but yeah, yours I thought was especially good. So you were initially you were pro-social emotions like empathy. I mean, what really? I mean, tell people listening what got you into thinking about that, because sort of like it was a car accident, wasn't it?
Yeah, the real impetus for the whole line of research that I conduct, which I should emphasize, spans the whole what I call the caring continuum. So I'm interested in
from empathy right through, yeah.
Exactly. So people who don't care enough, like people who are psychopathic, to people who are extraordinarily altruistic. And my initial interest in that emerged out of a car accident that I was in when I was 19 years old. And the short version of it is that as I was driving south on this great big freeway connecting the cities of Seattle and Tacoma in Washington State, a small dog ran out in front of my car, and I swerved to avoid it, which I now know you should never do. A lot of horrible accidents like mine begin that way. And my car, as I jerked the wheel and hit the dog anyways, which still just makes me cringe thinking about it, the car started first fishtailing and then spinning in donuts around the freeway, and until it finally came to a stop in the fast lane, facing into the oncoming traffic on this sort of overpass bridge that had no shoulders. So I had absolutely nowhere to go. I was completely stuck in my car. I had no phone because it was the 90s. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I literally had absolutely no idea how long I sat there waiting for one of the semis and cars, barreling toward me to not swerve in time and obliterate me. And then out of nowhere, this man appeared next to my car, who I later figured out had must have pulled over the moment he saw me on the opposite side of the road and then run across the road to get to me. And he got my car up and running again, and he got me back to safety, with just a few words exchanged between us. And then after he made sure I was going to be okay, he drove off into the night again after saying, you take care of yourself. And so as I got over my immediate sort of horror of the whole thing, in the days afterward, the thing that really stuck with me was I owe my life to this stranger's impulsive decision to take this enormous risk to park on the side of an overpass and run across the freeway to rescue the stranger whose car was stranded. And how could a person possibly be motivated to do that? Where do the emotions that would lead to that kind of choice come from? And so most of the research that I do is aimed at trying to understand that question.
That's amazing. I think it's just one of the things I realized in writing the Psychopath was that that I always thought I knew there was a kind of scale of psychopathy from everything I'd read, but I hadn't realized quite how much there was a scale of empathy as well.
Yeah.
And that we are all on that continuum somewhere, but that person who saved your life, who ran it, I mean, he has to be kind of right at that far end of, sort of like that altruism, as you say, is really, I think it's, so jealous of your career because I think it's utterly fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you. I do feel extremely lucky to get to do this kind of research. It's very motivating to know, both because it's so intrinsically interesting, because I get to work with such interesting people and get to learn more about them. And also I feel like it's important that we understand this really essential part of human nature.
Yeah. So one last question, Lisa, because I know we're short on time, but one last question is, where do you want this all to lead? Where do you want what do you want the website to achieve ultimately, sort of like a few years down the line? What do you want to actually happen?
Well, my goal would be for us to be as big and impactful as NAMI or Autism Speaks in terms of fundraising, number of people we're reaching, and those ways. So that's my goal.
Oh, brilliant. Well, if there's anything I can do to help, please just let me know.
Great.
We've had a few comments on here. There's, I don't know if you can read this. Sarah Woods is saying, continue to raise awareness about such a little understood mental affliction disorder. Well done. And thank you, Mary, for phoning me 3 years ago when I was at such a low ebb. It helped me enormously. Oh, thank you, Sarah. You're very welcome. But yes, there's people who've been listening in from France, from South Wales, from North Carolina, from Arundel, from Preston Pans, from Denmark. There's been all sorts of people listening. So hopefully this will do a little bit of getting the message out there again. But I'll put the link for the website in there. I will continue to shout about your website because I think it's brilliant. I think it's a fabulous resource. And I will continue to sort of send people that way. So thank you so much. And thank you for coming on and talking to me as well, especially with all the time difference issues we had.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.